All right, we're going to take a look at the next step of this transfer student project. What we had was two rosters, and you take somebody out of one into the other, copy over their grade, check to make sure there's no overlap, all the basics. But then I said, well, let's have this optional mode of being able to go in different directions. And so to test that out, I added a third class. So now there's a third period, and we can go 1 to 3, 3 to 2, whatever. And in order to make that readable, I didn't want to have the code all in one blob like it was. I separated it into functions. And so even though this is longer, the biggest function only has 5 lines. So it's not having to hold 10 things in your head all at once. It's just, hey, this guy does a job, this guy does a job. And when they all work together, it turns into something slightly bigger. So what we have is it asks you, where are we going from, where are we going to, and I made a function for that to get a roster, and it'll check to make sure they're typing a number that's in the range we need, in this case 1, 2, or 3. So let's say we're going from 3 to 1. Oh, I have it say from and then the person and then where. Maybe that's a little unintuitive because I keep thinking you do 2 numbers in a row. But let's say there's a Sarah in 3, and she's going to go to 1, and I believe there's a Sarah in 1, so it's going to say, hang on, tell me a last initial. She's going to be a Sarah F. And so now, here's the ugly part. When it's printing them, we definitely need to change the way it looks to make it in nice columns and rows, or take off the quotes or something. But it does have the new Sarah and the old one, and they stay intact and they don't overlap and they still keep their grades. And it took the Sarah out of this one. And so the value of putting stuff in functions is that now this has more data to work with, more things you can do, and more things it has to check. But the main function is still small. It's actually smaller than it was. Fewer lines, because now it's just like a table of contents telling us what's in there. We get the roster from, we get the roster to, and we get who's going. And then we take their grade just like we did before, except it says from instead of first period. And we check if it's in their destination, and it says to instead of second period. And then all this is exactly the same as it was. This is getting to the point where we want to start doing bigger things, where if you look at this and you look at the problems, you're like, well, you know, I wish the students had an ID number that they could carry with them. Or I wish the students were new objects that we made that had multiple attributes and things they could do. And so, yes, we need to get into using classes and using their methods and so on. But the only thing I added to make this work is stuff we've seen before. I didn't add any fancy things. I added a couple of functions, which we've used functions a lot, and they all have 1 or 0 parameters. They're nothing crazy. And then in order to handle this input where they say, okay, 3, we need to tell the computer that 3 means this stuff, and 2 means this stuff, and 1 means this stuff, right? So in order to do that, I just made a dictionary of dictionaries to say, hey, when they say 1, that means first. When they say 2, that means second. And so this is just another layer of what we already know, but it is what we already know. Okay. This stuff at the top is something I've used a tiny bit, and I've mentioned a tiny bit, but it's not really what we're used to, and it's called constant. Whenever you have a thing that's going to be used in multiple functions, but never changed by any of them, you could put it in all caps. That doesn't actually do anything. It doesn't tell the computer what can and can't happen. But the all caps signals to you and anybody reading it that, hey, this is a constant. This is something that's locked in. 1 is always going to mean first period. 2 is always going to mean second period. That's not going to be changed halfway through where we say, oh, by the way, actually 2 means fifth now. So it is a little bit dangerous because they can change. There's nothing stopping it except the self-control of the programmer. But it's very nice since I don't want to have to send this as a parameter to like 4 different functions, or send this whenever I need it, when it's just universally true. It's locked in. Once we see how many classes there are, we make a list of them. And then if they're asking the user for 1, 2, or 3, well, it's going to check. Is it really in 1, 2, or 3? We set that up at the beginning. So that's a little bit complicated. And then when you're looking at this, you have to think, okay, there's some stuff from the main, there's some stuff that was set even before that. But the point is, they're supposed to be simple enough that you shouldn't have to think about it. For example, a constant when you're making a graphical thing might be the height and width of the window. Assuming that's not going to change, you can just lock it in and say, this is 800 by 600. And if I ever mention height, which I'm probably going to need to a lot, that means 800, or that means 600, and width means 800. And I don't need to like send that individually to each function. It's just universally true. So this version I made had a couple errors at first, and we fixed them in second period, but I think it's good now. And as you can see, even though it does more, every function is just 4 or 5 lines doing its own little job. If I was going to make it prettier, I would definitely start with this one to print them in a way that's not just running into the end of a line and so on. But we'll get to that in a minute. Thanks.